As a community performing arts center, we at the State Theater are very excited to be part of the Center Film Festival and to help bring everyone entertainment at home, virtually and safely. We would like to thank everyone who participated by buying a ticket in order to watch these wonderful films, and we would particularly like to thank those who chose the State Theater as the beneficiary for a portion of their ticket sales. We hope you enjoy your programming, and we can't wait to see you. Bye.
Hello and welcome back. We're on our second live and recorded Q&A. We're going to check in and see if we have viewers this late at night. Wonderful. I would say that this is our Insomnia special, but we actually have one more coming up in a couple of hours. But with me right here in our Q&A are three people, one of which is who I thought was the only one I knew. And as it turns out, we just discovered backstage that Sarah Rich, the wonderful actress in #like, actually came in to audition for a film that I worked on. So that was a very cool connection. Jeremiah Kipp, who's the director of Perfect. Turns out we know each other back in New York days. He was an AD on one of my films and then, you know, has been directing amazing award-winning horror shorts and now features. Which he'll tell you more about. And Sarah Pirozek, we're so happy to have you here too. We're just meeting for the first time, but we're both in Film Fatale together, which I'm sure you'll tell us a little bit about. Thank you so much for joining us, and not too late, 11:46, but you know, COVID, what's time, you know? And honestly, one of the toughest parts of all of this, and you know, past the first layer, which is health and everyone's happiness and ability to connect on a personal level, is the fact that we can't have film festivals in person. And obviously, we want everyone to connect and meet each other. So hopefully we'll get you back here to Center County in person. But thank you so much for joining us on, this isn't Zoom, what is this? StreamYard. Okay, so for the people that are watching, all you have to do is write your questions, and we hope that you do in the comment section, either on Facebook or YouTube. So if you're watching on our website, just come join us in either Facebook or YouTube. And we'll play it. We're recording it, and we'll save it for you so you can watch it later. For some people, they've just finished watching Perfect and Like together. For some people, they're just kind of listening to Q&As, and maybe they'll watch your films later. But we're going to go ahead and ask about the content in the film. So don't worry too much about spoilers. So Jeremiah, let's start with you since you're the short that precedes the feature. Tell us a little bit about your film. Why did you want to direct it? And I think you co-wrote it, right?
When I knew the actress producer, whose name is Ashley Tyler, I directed her in a horror feature called Teresa and Allison a few years ago. And she was looking for a director, and I've always been a big fan of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So Ashley proposed a short modern-day version of Frankenstein, where the Victor Frankenstein character was a woman, so it felt like a feminist twist on an old myth. And by setting it in the 21st century in our swipe left, swipe right dating culture, I thought it was appropriate for the times in finding the perfect man. But it was really the old school stuff that attracted me. Like, I've always loved the idea of stitching together the perfect person and hoping that your dreams can be fulfilled that way. And also, Mary Shelley has always been my celebrity crush. So it was my tribute to her.
Love that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I just have to say, I feel like this is a little more gory.
More gory than Frankenstein? Well, they both are about dead bodies that are getting stitched together by people who hate them. So there you have it. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm just immune to gore at this point. I thought it was very beautiful.
Wow. You know, when we were cutting the teaser together, a student of ours who's actually one of the filmmakers in the student lineup, Jack Meyer, he had thrown in that piece from your film, Perfect, and it's just at a crescendo. I don't know if you guys watched it. And, you know, some of my friends were watching, they're like, oh, such great movies, which of course I agree. And then they'd be like, yeah, but I was eating when I was watching that teaser. I really wish you warned me about the blood everywhere in the thing. But it is what comes to mind when you think horror or, you know, thrill, you know, more horror actually than thriller. And for Friday the 13th, I thought it would be really nice to have really incredible filmmakers, super talented artists like you as well, Sarah Rich, Sarah Pirozek, and Jeremiah, like deal with a subject that I have to totally confess is not one that I'm very well versed in, because I scare really easily. But a lot of people love Friday the whole like thriller horror genre. So I thought it'd be really cool to have your two films together, probably for what's obvious for the audience, but you have a woman as your main character kind of piecing together this perfect man in this really aggressive and violent way. And then Sarah, tell us a little bit about what made you write this, which is kind of about a woman as well, piecing something together, not in the same kind of gory, literally body parts, but like this
Right.
horrific story about her sister. And it does
Right.
a thriller. So what made you write that?
Okay. Well, I have to address the whole horror genre thing, because
Please
I'm a terrible fraidy cat also. I'm really not a horror person, but I do love thrillers and I do love noirs. And I was determined that I wanted to make something horrifying about a horrifying subject matter with no blood, no guts, no gore, no knives piercing, and yet you're horrified. Because when I started reading about internet predation against teens and tweens, and mainly young women, also some young men, I really felt like, how do I talk about this in a way that is kind of like a Trojan horse, that someone who's a kid or a parent could watch it and say, okay, I'm just going to watch this scary movie, and then they take something away from it. And what they hopefully take away from it is that the internet is a really scary place. It's not a safe space, and it's not about the thrills and chills of being, in a room. It's not unfriended. Nothing's going to come out of the screen and grab you. But it's literally about the real people in the world who are predators, who are bullying and harassing young people.
Mm-hmm. So really horror in the fullest degree.
Yeah.
I actually thought they were both feminist in a twisted way. And both of your films were kind of giving power to women, making certain choices that we've seen men do over and over again in films and never think twice about. And, here are women doing things that may not be so great, the way that they're behaving, and just allowing them to make these quote unquote mistakes, probably for relatively good reasons. In your case, Jeremiah, finding love, which isn't as, hasn't have as much gravitas to it as, like Sarah was saying in her story, where it's trying to figure out who has hurt her sister, bullied her sister, or was there some kind of sexual violence? Or, she sees the aggression. Like you were saying, the flipping right and left, they're on these chat rooms, right? These chat rooms. So Sarah, tell us a little bit about your history in your acting roles, and if this was something that was challenging to take on for any particular reason, if at all.
Definitely was a challenge. Sarah wrote this absolutely wonderfully fun and real script. I say fun because it felt relevant and it felt like something that was important, not just like it was really something to really get my talons into, and definitely was like the greatest role I had at that time, and still like it's a role I really look back on very fondly. And to be able to be like, wow, this is actually a position to really, get my artistry out and get the layers and say something that actually has relevance in the world. So yeah, that posed like a challenge as well, because I was like, I felt this responsibility to not just myself as a woman, but other women in general, just like, oh, wow, this is a real story that really happens to people. I want to make sure it's done right. And I want to give a voice to those people in the best of my ability. So that was
yeah. I just thought your performance was so, it was chilling, but I don't mean in a scary way per se, but it was chilling in that way too. And I feel like you had taken on, I know that I'm projecting onto the role, but you were taking on this kind of history of, abuse and even like microaggressions, if not full-on aggressions, I see you shaking your head, Sarah Pirozek. Is that something that you guys talked about behind the scenes? There was this kind of matter-of-fact way of saying, we're done, and this is happening. And she knew sometimes she wasn't quite sure this was the guy, but she's like, you're going to be the person who's just going to take the hit.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you
Do you want to talk
that?
about it more, Sarah? You know
Yeah.
what? I just want to say that the first time I met Sarah, we were introduced through Mark Menchaca's manager, who also manages Sarah, who's amazing, Ian Ames. And he said, "Oh, see this actress? I also represent her." And I was like, "Oh, all right, whatever. I don't know." And she came and met me, and as soon, when you meet someone, I don't know if Sarah felt the way I did, but I felt like there was this immediate, like, I know who you are. I felt her energy, her being, and that's what I also love about your screening tonight. That's Friday the 13th, which is to me a very witchy, powerful bait. So I dig it. But there is something about the character that I wrote, and very much in Sarah Rich, that emanates as this very otherworldly feminine power that I picked up on immediately. And I think most women who read my script and most women who see the film, they already know why she's angry. They already know why she's pissed off. We grow up from being little girls being told, you can't come in here, it's boys only, girls aren't allowed, or you can't do that, or don't get dirty, let the boys play, or boys will be boys, and that's just before you're like 7 or 8. And then you get to like the sexual microaggressions and all the things, and then genuine aggressions, and then just being diminished and patronized and put down. I don't think Sarah had to go very far to find the core of her character. But she had to be an amazing actress to play that character, and boy, did she. Because I didn't want her to be a victim. I didn't need to see another film with a woman as victim. I also didn't need to see another film with a simpering, cute, oh my, running from the back, whatever, a slasher thing. Right. I really wanted to see, and I think terrify men with the rage that bubbles below the surface with many of us. And Sarah can talk more about how she dismantled the script and then put it back together again. She's I say this every time we do a Q&A, but you guys haven't heard it yet. I would go and see her every night, and she was in a cabin next to me, and I would see her notebooks open, and she is writing notes about her character and taking it apart. She is the most prepared, hardworking, and then when she gets on stage, or in front of the camera rather, I'm sure Jeremiah has experienced this too with great performances. You'll be watching and you forget you wrote it. That she was so good. When you have a good actor in front of you, you forget you wrote it. She totally became the character, as did Mark Menchaca. And very, very, I just gave her tiny little adjustments. There are road maps within the script, like I wrote a little bit of internal writing in the script, just a tiny bit here and there that she picked up on, but she really needed so little adjustment. And some of the times I would say something and I'd go, no, just forget what I said. It's all right. Just, that was a better direction, but thank you for trying this. Amazing. She's amazing. And I don't know why she's not on every film, TV show. Well, I guess we have COVID, so that's why.
Sarah. Oh my God. Sarah, what were you doing? What were you doing with that script? What were you dismantling? What were you looking for? What were you playing with?
Technically, I just always wanted to make sure that even though we did film a lot in order when it was the in the basement scene, we did those chronologically. But I just always wanted to make sure I was like storyline at the right place, like mentally, where is she on her journey? So like, I just wanted to make sure I was always clear on that. But yeah, and just seeing like how that buildup unfolds. And like you said, Sarah, though, it like every female can tap into that rage. And kind of when you're tested with it, when guys don't really understand that you can go there, then it just like, then the lid's off and then you're like, fuck you, I'm going there. Let's test these waters. So that was a lot of fun, actually. But yeah, just also not letting myself, because it is so fun, not letting myself go to that place every time, because you don't want to just hit the same notes every time, even though it feels really good, you know?
Right.
So, yeah, that's pretty much a lot of technicality.
I mean, that's a great transition. I mean, I do want you to answer Sarah's question, Jeremiah, about working with the actress, but it's kind of, it doesn't have to be connected, but I feel like making this transition because it seems so natural. The rage that can inform this decision. I mean, how many of us have felt that our body parts have been like picked apart from all these different ways in which we've been perceived, objectified, and so on? Usually it's women. I mean, not always anymore, and maybe not ever only women, but it feels that way, at least in the media, and how we're represented and picked apart and all that. So I love that element of what it felt like the film was driving at. So the rage, I think, is a really good transition to talk to you about that. Like, first of all, deciding to take it on, not to, you know, make it about gender, but, you know, you are a male director. She's the writer, you know, writer, producer, or co-writer, right? Co-writer?
Yeah, she wrote.
Yeah. And here you are coming in, which, you know, I think you could talk a little bit about that, and also how you channeled her rage and tried to help her get to that place where she could, it's odd because what both of you, these actresses, have in common, and I love this about your work, Sarah, also, is that there is that, and we see it because of the actions and the way the script is written. But they're both so subtle and determined and careful. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, I don't see you being super emotional about this. You don't seem like you're not aware of what you're doing. It's so careful. And I love that. I love that about both women. So Jeremiah, talk a little bit about that, or any element of what I was just discussing.
Yeah, well, I think that Ashley, the actress and producer, she didn't have to search particularly hard for like things to be angry about,
right?
Because, as you know, she's frequently, you know, objectified, and I think many women can identify with not being allowed to speak and not being allowed to really be, you know, in their own skin. And I think that the thing I liked about the script was that it started out like from the very first images, it was about her objectifying men, which I thought was really a great way to flip the script. And the way that her character transforms because it's basically her and a bunch of men, and she transforms all the men into objects. And it was really interesting casting all the guys, because essentially the question was like, are you cool with being treated like a piece of chicken, you know, on screen, because you're going to be totally objectified and won't really be allowed to speak and will be cut off, you know. And I thought that was wonderful, actually, because it was an opportunity to kind of flip the script on something that I think is personally offensive, and allowed Ashley access into feelings of outrage and anger and power that I thought were worth making a film about.
Absolutely. I'm excited for each of you to watch the other film so you can see my insanity. I had to give myself a good reason to watch super scary movies. And watching the work of incredible artists was one of them, which is why I would love for both of you to talk a little bit about how this fits into your work. What work have you been doing? I mean, obviously, I know the answer to some of that with both of you, but maybe you could share with the audience a little bit about where you're coming from and how this work is part of it. And I don't know, Jeremiah, if you want to start, The only thing I've seen 2 of your horror films. I haven't seen your features, and I just had a hard time getting through that first one. I think it's only 3 minutes, and it was so visceral, and I had such a reaction. I couldn't keep watching, which is exactly what people are yearning for when they watch films like this. You have an incredible touch as an artist and as a director, and that one's called Drool. So maybe just talk a little bit about your background as an artist, and talk about some of your films and how this fits in and where you're headed, and yeah.
Yeah, well, Drool was a 3-minute experimental short that I did a few years ago, and it's a very avant-garde experimental film that was made with performance artists, and it was all about this sort of body horror, and it's similar in the vein to Perfect, where it's like people who are like being subsumed or taken over in this really strange and sexual way. But like, one of the things that I liked about the movie was that some actors who have worked with me have seen that film and like chose to, they plug into it in different ways. Like, one of the actors from The Wire did a film I did called Pickup, and he really loved the script. It was by a really great New York playwright named Jessica Blank. And but then he watched a bunch of my films, and like when he watched Drool, his child has disability, and he he interpreted a lot of the film as being about like struggling to express yourself and express yourself often through anger, like via disability. And I thought that was really interesting, because a lot of the work we done in preparation for that piece was the actors being blindfolded, or the actors not having control over certain parts of their body. So Jim was really onto something when he saw that. But I don't know, I think all the movies are about like these sort of twisted versions of love and relationships. And I think that the thing I try to do with these horror films is say that love is the most important thing that there is. But human beings are complicated and often dangerous animals. And it's only through the powers of our imagination that we could even possibly break through that. And even then, we might find ourselves in a trap. So like that's been true. Like the last feature that we just finished post on, called Slapface, is about a little boy grieving the loss of his parents, and he befriends this hideous monster that lives in the woods. So it has this Grimm's fairy tale aspect to it. But you wonder if, like, it's like the film toys with what's worse, because like he's in a abusive situation at home with his older brother, and they love each other, but there's a system there's a systematic cruelty between them. So then the audience is watching the movie and hopefully will wonder, like, what is worse, this element of the fantastic and the imagination, which is a monster, or the abuse and the love that is happening in their home. And we don't do the thing where the monster is all in the kid's mind or something like that. It's thankfully quite literal. But it is a horror film. So if you're in a Jeremiah Kipp film, there's a good chance you're probably not going to make it.
Awesome.
Jeremiah, where did this inspiration, do you think, come from? Like, I know you, and I don't think of you as a dark person or someone who's caught up in these possible dark alternatives, or at least maybe I didn't pick up on those. What do you think got you inspired? What got you hooked into this genre, if anything? And how does it have an impact on your life to write/direct these films?
Well, a lot of the horror and thriller filmmakers I know are actually really well-adjusted, very nice people. A lot of the horror directors I know are really quite gentle and kind and have an interesting, like, rich inner life. But, I grew up very deep in the woods. It was very remote. I grew up with my grandparents, and I remember just kind of having a lot of feelings of isolation and loneliness as a kid. And I would walk around in the woods, and I would imagine, a lot of creepy things being out there. And then, also just kind of growing up, like, on the road that I grew up on, I remember when I saw the movie Blue Velvet, I thought David Lynch had tapped into something, which was like there were a lot of stories where I grew up of like kids who were being abused, and like there was a really horrifying story about a kid who was being molested by her father, and like she was taken away by social workers, but then she missed her family so much that she actually went back to her horrific situation with her family because she preferred the horrific situation with her family to being like disconnected from the people that she loved. And like complicated things like that are what made me really interested in horror as a metaphor for all the complicated things about human beings. I think that horror allows us to talk about those things in a safe way.
Right.
It's like Hansel and Gretel would be a story about child abuse if it weren't for the fact that they wander and they're lost in the woods and they find a witch, and then it takes on elements of the fantastic. Right. But children can relate to those things because they feel like there's a truth in it. And I remember as a kid watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and saying there's no difference between that and Hansel and Gretel. They're the same. Like you can read sociological stuff into Hansel and Gretel, like you read political stuff into Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think that, when a horror film is really good, it's often rich in metaphor and meaning and doesn't necessarily have to wear it on its sleeve. It's something that you feel and you intuit and you carry it with you. And it can allow you to process cathartic things and potentially grief and trauma and pain and all this other stuff in a way that's safe, because when you're in a movie theater, you're safe and you can leave the movie theater and you're safe. Like
unfortunately,
I wasn't chainsawed by Leatherface. I'm safe. I'm still alive. I'm still here. And I had an experience that reminded me of some of these of life's random strangeness, and I came out the other side of it. So I think horror movies are a great way for us to process our traumatized feelings. I think it's often not to get political, but frequently when there are Republicans in office, a lot of horror films come out.
I had a feeling
have often prospered in times of Republicans being in political power. So I'll just leave it on that.
I had a feeling you might go there, but there is an interesting. First of all, that was really helpful for me because I do wonder about that a lot. I know you and I have talked about it before, and this was very helpful to see it in that way. And Sarah, I wonder if you can talk, as I know you deal more, this is actually your first fiction feature, right? So, and you've done commercials, you've done docs, and you've touched on so many different ways to work with film to tell different kinds of stories, even if it's a commercial, that's still somewhat of a story and for another purpose. And I feel like in some ways, not to say that what Jeremiah is talking about is not real horror, which it can be, but he said, I didn't get massacred, and you're kind of moving more in the direction of and so is your short Jeremiah is moving more in the direction of some actual horrors right now, but you've gone more in the direction of thriller. And you mentioned something earlier this evening that made me think of Knife in the Water. That was a film I was able to watch, and I know that it's kind of more of a straightforward, relatively straightforward narrative. I wouldn't say it's thriller or horror per se, but it is a thriller, and it really made me think of that film when you were talking earlier about your approach. So maybe talk to us a little bit about your history in filmmaking, what drew you to do this film, and how that fits into what you're working on now, or where you think you might go with this direction.
Right. Well, I never really thought that I would make a horror per se film. I come from experimental background, filmmaking background, also like Jeremiah. And my first films were, it's almost I've come full circle. They weren't thrillers, they're little shorts, but they were dealing with a specific capsule to talk about sexual politics and identity politics and all that stuff.
Sure.
And we're talking many, many years ago. But my first film was called Confessions of a Girl Who Never Received a Visitation from the Sacred Heart. And it's all about her being quite lonely and angry and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for her destiny was really the metaphor. And at the end, she had to take her metaphor, and it was basically befriending her best friend. And it was just a little Super 8 movie I made that then got me into film school. And then when I was there, I made another film called Before and After French Kissing about, it was experimental. So it wasn't really about anything, but it was about everything. And a little bit like #like is, it's about everything. But it was definitely a shout against patriarchy. It was talking about how young women have these incredible bonds that aren't necessarily sexualized when they're younger with other women, that then once you go into a more adolescent kind of arena, you lose, one can lose, and girls can lose a sense of autonomy, a sense of agency, a sense of themselves. So Before and After French Kissing is really the before puberty and post-puberty, and when you get involved in sexual relationships, that you can lose a sense of self. And I guess I could stretch the metaphor and say that can be horrifying. But I love using a sort of collage approach then in experimental film. And then when I came to the States, just talking about nuts and bolts, I came to the States from England because you can tell I talk funny. And I was landed on the shores of New York and said, oh my goodness, there's this thing called rent here that's quite horrifying also. And I was like, how is an experimental filmmaker going to make a living here? Particularly, and this is back then when there was more of a glass ceiling than you could ever imagine for females doing anything in the business. Even now, 50% of film school graduates are women, and there's certainly not 50% of women directing TV shows or studio movies. And we know all about that. But, or those who don't, that's what's happening. But so I just kind of hustled my way up, and then I got into directing music videos, and I was very much involved in the music world in England. I've been in a band, and all my friends were in bands.
Really?
So I kind of grabbed, yeah.
What kind of music?
Punk, new wave, that kind of thing. Because I'm an old bitch. And yeah, no, I was going out with a guy who was in a band called Wire at the time, and then we broke up, and then I moved to then another guy who was anyway, and then I moved to the States, and I met through some different friends, the people at Uptown Records, which was Andre Harrell and Puffy and people like that. And my boyfriend at the time said, oh, can you direct a music video for me? And I directed a music video, and it kind of worked my way around it. But I did a lot of low budget hip hop music videos, which I loved because hip hop was my thing at the time. Wow. That was really my jam. And then from that, I kept trying to do more videos. And, you know, a friend of mine said to me, girl, just stop trying to knock on this door. Knock on the door where they want you. They want the blonde white girl in the commercial world. Do that. And I was like, I don't want to do that necessarily. And he said, do you want to pay your rent? And I said, yes, I do. So I ended up getting into the commercial world, you know, by hook or by crook, by recutting music videos, making promos, doing commercials. But all the time I kept wanting to go back to my roots of making storytelling. So this is how I got back to this, was I started making shorts again, and then looked for things I cared about.
What were your shorts about?
Well, I made one based on a Vice magazine article called The A to Z of Being a Whore, which was really an ode to not be a whore. And it was very feminist. I don't know if Sarah's ever seen it, but I will send you a link. I think
we all want a link. What do you say, Jeremiah? I think we all want a link. We'll watch it.
Yes, I'll send you a private link.
Right on.
So so then started writing, because it was then that I realized I have all these stories I want to tell. And when you're an experimental filmmaker, you're a very visual person, but you're not you're not writing. And so I started learning to write.
That's awesome. Why this story though? This is quite the story to tackle, especially as your debut feature, your first time feature film.
Well, as Jeremiah knows, as you know, it's like getting married to an idea. So I wanted to care about the idea. I didn't want it to be a rom-com or something, which are perfectly fine, but that wasn't for me. And at the time, it was when I started writing it, it was just sort of pre the Me Too wave, which sounds like it was, Sarah, doesn't it sound like Me Too was forever ago and it was like yesterday?
Everything feels like forever ago right now.
I know, but it's just like 3.5 years ago, something like that. Anyway, so I started writing it just before that, and then it was almost like, as you know, as an artist, you kind of plug into the universal unconscious, and it's almost like there's this chimera, you know, that rose out of culture, and it just rose up through me, and you know, I'd just been reading about predation on the internet, and I said, that's disgusting, that's terrible. How are people allowing this to happen? I heard that sexploitation of minors isn't even a felony in many states. They don't even have the laws on the books to prosecute. So I just thought, let me try and talk about the damage and the wreckage and the flotsam and jetsam that's left behind after something terrible like this happens. You know, look at Nancy Schwartzman's documentary, Roll Red Roll.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's phenomenal. And, you know,
very relevant where we are. We have a big football culture here as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that film. It's very different than either of your films, but yes, it deals with a lot of similar issues. But where were you going with that thought? You were talking
about that culture. Basically, we're just circling back to patriarchy, and that is toxic for not only women; it's toxic for men and boys too, because they have to align themselves or fight against it, and that's very difficult for them. So, you know, or they're you know, gender non-conforming, so then they have to struggle with that also. So it's that's where I guess I was going with it, that it's we live in a very complicated world, obviously, as Jeremiah said, and it's there's a lot of pain out there, but it would be great to be able to almost like pop the balloon and allow some of the pressure out, that I hope my film does, because I wanted to show that pain and the wreckage that's left behind, of bullying, of toxic masculinity, you know, rape culture, all that stuff that's out there. Because predation on the internet won't exist if the peers don't bully the other children who are involved with it. They can't be blackmailed if there's no bullying, if there's no judgment, if there's no slut shaming, you know, or gay shaming, or whatever it is.
Right. I think in both of your case, you know, I find this interesting. I teach film here at Penn State, and one of the ways in which we try and express how to activate something that is driven by a vision or a theme. Like you were talking, your list is so long, and you know, Jeremiah was also talking a lot about the ways in which women are objectified. It's a shorter film, so it's dealing with some of the shorter list. But what both of your films have done that is so strong, and within different genres, but in that kind of like, let's scare you, Friday the 13th. But it's, you know, is being able to tell one story about one main character dealing with something about, you know, basic human desire, like to make things right for her sister, you know, and to be able to then tackle such a big subject with so many implications, so many subtleties. You know, it's almost breathless when you think about it in both of your cases, like the oodles of history of this, and then where do you go from it? And I particularly like the way that you crafted the character of the man that she puts in, that she thinks is guilty, and his character is so beautifully crafted. And I want you to talk just a little bit about that, if you don't mind, because in some ways, he's not what you expect him to be. It's certainly not what she expected him to be, but it's also not on the nose, the good guy. It's just this kind of bystander character. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about that. And then Sarah Rich, I would love to hear you talk about what it was like to interact with him on that level as well. Because like you said, you brought a lot of your own experiences, and here's this like really nice guy who's actually just an actor, you know. So yeah, Sarah Pirozek, if you can talk a little bit.
Okay, let me set my beautiful Sarah Rich up here. But yes, I think that it's all, you know, I say this every time, but I'll say it again. It bears repeating, as the White Stripes say. Your film is made in casting, and most of your direction is made in casting. And I'd met Mark Menchaca through some friends of friends, and didn't know him. I'd seen a little role he played in a movie that most people haven't seen, which is incredible, called She's Lost Control by Anya Markat. And he played, it was about a sex therapist, like a sex surrogate therapist. And he played one of her clients. And he was this incredibly vulnerable guy who had a very dark turn in it. And I thought, okay, this is an amazing actor. And he had almost no lines, and he did so much work with no lines. So he knew what he was doing. He delivered, and he was maybe on screen 10 minutes tops through the whole film. But I just fell in love with his thing. And then I met him. I said, oh, I saw you in that movie. He goes, someone saw that movie? Fantastic. And I said, I'm thinking about this idea. I've been ruminating about this idea. And I think the universe just sent you to my doorstep. And I'm going to write a movie for you. And he said, no, you're not. And I was like, yes, I am. But give me 6 months and I'll come back to you. And he said, okay. And I give him a ton of credit, because I went back to him in 6 months and I said, here's the script. And he was like, okay. And he read it in 24 hours. He got back to me and he said, meanwhile, he'd had huge success in Ozark and a couple of other things. And he got back to me and said, I want to play this role. And I was just like flabbergasted. I said, this is no, fancy wagons. This is not, I've been doing commercials and I knew, I'd seen the fancy side. This is not fancy. He took the bus up to Woodstock when we shot, he's that guy.
Naked and in a basement. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, exactly. You're going to be naked for most of this, like Jeremiah's Boys, a piece of meat in a basement. It's going to be not pretty. And, but then just when we were going to shoot, the actress I had lined up for it pulled out a week before we were going to shoot. And I had to shut everything down. Like I'd have booked everyone. It was like a nightmare. So then I was because I was trying to develop another movie at the same time. And I was like, I couldn't pivot to that. And I said, Mark, I'm so sorry. And, he's a working guy. So long story short, he said, I'll hold on for this. And I went back to him 8 months later or 7 months later. And he said, yeah, my agents are kind of being a little difficult, because I was trying to go through the agents and do it correctly. And I went back to Mark and I said, I can't. And he said, no, I'll tell them I want to do this. I can give you 8 days. So he gave me 8 days of his time, and Sarah and Mark sat in that basement. We scheduled it so everything went forward, so they could work on their arc. And to set Sarah up properly for this is like the way I wrote him was, this very classic macho pickup driving
on the
dude.
Outside.
On the outside.
Right. So
and what are we all but on the outside, right? What, someone watching this, how do they see all of us and think who we are? They'll make assumptions about us, and there's a lot of different stuff going on in all of us. But so then I wrote the arc for him to become almost like, not Stockholm syndrome, but like almost like a friend to her, because he sees what she's going through, and then becomes completely submissive to her in a way, and submissive to his fate more than her. And he played it you'll agree, he played it perfectly. And he's such a likable, watchable actor on the screen, that you just see a flicker of the eye, or you see an inhale, exhale, and he speaks volumes. And then when you put him together with Sarah, they were coming at each other like 100 miles an hour, and they like this, and then you watch this for the rest of the movie, like what happens,
Yeah, I would agree with all those motions. So Sarah, what was it like? I mean, it's a pretty demanding role as it is, but some of your scenes outside that basement, you can handle as a strong actress. But once you get in that room, how did you work things out with him? I've seen his work in Ozark. He does the subtlety in there too. Like, what is it? The gay tough.
Gay hillbilly. Yeah.
Gay hillbilly that you don't know is gay. This man's got those layers down.
Yeah.
And you're bringing your reality, your story, your amazing relationship with Sarah Pirozek. How'd you do it? What'd you do? How'd you make it work for you? Because in the end, it's just you in there.
Right. Yeah, it is. I'm the one in charge.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, as to what Sarah said, like he, as a human, as Mark Menchaca, is just such an incredibly kind and open person that I felt very safe as an actress to just go where I needed to go. I never felt like, oh, just because he's nice, this isn't going to be hard because he's nice. It's not like, it means, okay, game on, let's go. And because he's so talented, it was like just feeding off of each other's challenge and each other's give and take. So it was an incredible gift to work with him. It was, and being in that almost black box scenario setup of like the set, yeah, the lighting and angle of the camera changes, but you get to forget about the world around you, and you're just like zoning in on this human and like reading their every color, their every move. And so it felt like this like lions going around each other kind of thing. And that was just so much fun to play with. And then, yeah, as those 8 days went on, as we did those scenes in consecutive orders, like the more I got to know him as a person too, like that definitely fed into it a little bit, where it was like, this guy isn't as scary in real life, but I have this agenda. And it almost was like, as a character, like when you start feeling the power you have in that room,
right?
It's like, okay, well, how does it stop? Like the lid is off, like just keep going, because I don't know how to make it stop anyways. So it was almost like, once you see the wounded bird, like just keep going.
Right. That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to read too much into it, but it almost looked like the two of you switched, and your character takes on this kind of now normalized, or certainly by now being critical, there's critical analysis of it. But until however many years ago, it was just anyone can, men were accepted to be that aggressive. We've just normalized it.
Which I
thought taking it from him, and great.
So fun, because it was like, this is a very flawed character and a very flawed moment. Like how far can you go until vengeance and justice is actually, you're not doing it right anymore. Like you are becoming the villain that you thought you were fighting against, and it was fun as a female to be like, hats off, let's do it.
Right. And she does it for her sister, or at least in her mind she does.
It's all justified. It's like someone died and someone needs to be at fault, and no one else is going to find the solution, so I will. Very strong, amazing character.
Well, we have a comment from Thomas Martin Camden III, who I know as Marty. He teaches here at Penn State. You'll be hearing from him tomorrow after the Dystopia block. And Marty wrote, "The acting was so lovely," and I couldn't agree more. I feel like we covered so much to cover, and we only have a short amount of time, but I feel like we've touched on the careers of these amazing artists that we have here. I think that we touched on the larger issues, the kind of gravitas of the projects, why they make it. I think it might be good, because it is this genre, to now get to the brass tacks. I know this excites Jeremiah. Like, how do you guys make that happen? So in other words, the level of aggression and the stunts that maybe you guys needed in the basement, or the makeup and shooting and artistry that you do. So let's get to that nitty gritty, Jeremiah. Maybe you start us off and talk a little bit about, how did you do it? How do you get those body parts to look that way? The sewing of, I can't even say these words. Jeremiah, take it away from me.
Sure.
Can't even say it.
I think that, when you're making a movie about the extremities of violence, I think that, you have to surround yourself with really well-adjusted, safe people. So like when you're, like if you've got actors who are doing a scene that requires like rage and violence, it's helpful. The thing that you want to do is kind of create a safe space where people can do those things and not be afraid of hurting each other.
Right.
So when they're living in the reality of the scene, because they feel safe and because they trust each other, and because they trust the people around them. That's what allows the actors and certain members of the crew to go a full distance. And I don't think that frequently, like when I've worked with actors doing these really difficult scenes, they usually feel really great afterwards. Like they've run the 100-yard dash or something like that. You know, it's like they've experienced something very fully. But that can only be done if you feel safe with your co-star. Right. That can only feel safe. You can only do those things if they feel safe with me and don't feel like I'm doing something, you know, like I'm not trying to damage anybody. In fact, quite the opposite. You know, it's like the thing that you want to create is that feeling of freedom, you know, and that feeling of trust. So when all these body parts and entrails and blood is everywhere, the flip side of that coin too is that, you know, when you're making movies that then they start to get a little gory, to me it feels like the Muppet Show or something like that. Like the more kind of bizarre it gets, the more kind of ridiculous and absurd it is while you're making it. And for the audience, it's a quite different experience because they're seeing bodies stitched together and entrails and blood and mayhem and chaos. You know, like, you know, in the feature that I just did, like a bunch of people are getting destroyed. And when you're doing it on set, it's either people feel able to express their darkest corners, or they're playing make believe, you know, or it's like you can't take it too seriously when you're like, you know, afterwards when you're scrubbing the blood off of the floor, you know, it's like, what are we doing with our lives? But I don't know. I think it's a gas, you know, and I also think that like, and I've never, you know, it kind of echoes back to something we were talking about before, which is that I think that the only way that you can do work that is this extreme is if you are well adjusted and want to make a comment on the darkness that is in our hearts and minds, you know.
Absolutely. I'm so glad
that's where I think that's where we were coming from when we made Perfect and some of the other movies that I've made too. Often we feel a great sense of joy and relief afterwards.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you said that because of course it comes back to, you know, making sure you have something to say, and then how you say it is entirely up to you as an artist. But
it's so obvious that Sarah and Sarah trust each other completely, you know. It's like,
well, they obviously, yeah.
You know, and that's like, it's so great being on this particular panel. It's always nice when you get the chance to be with an actor and a director who have been through something together, and just the way that you guys talk about the film and the character, but also like your relationship as artists. You know, like that, I think it sounds like it's coming from a very similar place and also grounded in doing what feels like really important work.
I agree. And I think when you see the film, Jeremiah, and if people who are watching haven't seen it yet, when you see it, I'm sure you'll take notice of how Sarah Rich's energy, like even in the wide shots, like you are entirely with this young woman. So obviously it's your crafting as well, Sarah Pirozek. And obviously exactly what Jeremiah was saying, it's your relationship. And you can see that very clearly, not just with Sarah Rich, but with your entire crew and the shoot. You know, there's a real sense of trust, I think, Jeremiah, is what you're saying. And I agree. But we did want to get some of that gory stuff, Jeremiah. How do you do it? What are you bringing on set? Like how many quarts of blood and, you know, what's going on with all that flesh?
Bobby Flay talks about his cooking secrets.
You don't have all right, give us one tip because we have to end soon anyway.
Okay, well, I mean, I don't know, get yourself some rubber latex, but put a sheen on it, and then cover it in a bunch of glue, and then add a smoke machine, and you've got a perfect charnel house.
Thank you. And Sarah Rich, until Sarah Pirozek comes back, maybe you could talk a little about, because I know yours was a little closer to reality, and that you know, some of that horror stuff, like to his body. Like, what was it like? You knew it was makeup, obviously, right?
Right. Yeah.
What did you guys do on set to create that? I mean, it's so real, so it's a little.
Did you say a specific moment? You went out for a second.
It's not bloody in your case, but
Yeah,
there's stuff that you guys did to that basement. I'm speaking more literally. Like how did you guys set that up? And when you were really aggressive on him, like with him and all that, talk to us about the set and what that was like.
Yeah. Well, it was fun with the basement because the lighting was so naturally already good. They just like, adjusted a couple of things. But there's no windows, so it had this grimy feel to it. And yeah, with like throwing.
I can talk. Oh, go ahead.
No.
No. I want you to do it. I just didn't want you to not know.
Oh no! I mean, I will always remember the throwing up scenes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's great. That one.
So lovely, with all that pizza. But
what was it made of?
What?
What was the throw up made of?
Oh my gosh! Well, so there were two different scenes, but that we had throw up with. Or like it was the same scene, but we filmed it at two different times. The second time I will always remember because it was a pickup shot in your house, Sarah, and it was Amy's soup, like lentil soup or something mixed with lemonade. And it was awesome. But I don't know. It's kind of one of those things like where I just get into actor mode. I'm like, this is what I have to do. Okay. Like you don't really question it. So, but it definitely was a flavor I'm okay not having again.
Yeah. We have to wrap soon, but one of the reasons I asked about that is because when you're dealing with something so heavy, something so real, you're also on a film set, and you have to be able, like Jeremiah was saying, you have to just keep a well-adjusted feeling on set, and so the technicalities of it sometimes is helpful to take you out of what's really going on, and especially in your case with #like, but not any much less so in Perfect and some of the other projects that you do, Jeremiah. Two more comments, and then I'll ask you my last question. Marty says, Jeremiah, your visuals were very particular, and I love that. You established a very fantastic tone, and that does happen to be one of your many strengths. So that's nice that Marty picked up on that on his very first film. Yes. So I'd like to ask, is there anything you wanted to share that I didn't get to ask you before we say goodnight? Anyone want to share anything?
Well, if it was 2 weeks ago, I'd say go vote.
Right.
I say to everyone, stay strong, be allies to each other, support women, and dig into the love and love yourself. I know that's not film stuff at all, but we need that right now.
It can be film stuff. That's really nice.
I'll latch onto that and just speak to any of the male directors who may be listening to this. There's a lot of men in the film industry that I know feel very threatened by the notion of female directors and people of color, and others too, who the idea is like, oh, they're going to push me out of a job. There won't be an opportunity for me. Oh, it's so tough to be like a white guy right now, and so on and so forth. And I have to say that it's not divided up that way, you guys. It's not that way. It's like there should always be the opportunity for everyone to have a voice and to be able to express themselves. And I think that the fear that it will take away from your work is an irrational fear. I think that you guys, we've certainly held on to the patriarchy for quite a long time. And I also sincerely believe that you guys shouldn't feel threatened by other voices. In fact, it enriches everyone when everyone has an opportunity to share their story.
I completely agree. And thank you so much for saying that. And Sarah, what about you? What haven't you shared that I didn't ask you that you'd like to?
Well, I'm not sure, but I guess along those lines, yeah, just that, I mean, times are confusing, and we all are trying to move towards progress. But that doesn't mean like to lower your voice and not say your stories that you want to say. Like everyone, just
Absolutely.
your creativity is your power. And as you said, Jeremy, that like Jeremiah, sorry, that there's a place for everyone to have their voice, and yeah, just use it.
That's awesome. Thank you. I just want to say that with the three of you here at the festival, I feel like more people will be aware of the work that you're doing. Hopefully they'll watch this in replay if they're not watching it live. But Sarah, you have a really promising career ahead of you. Your handling of this character and some of the other work, and as we just discovered, you had come in and you were like right there, and you know, it's so beautiful to see your work and that you bring a truth to the screen the way that you do, and stay open to play characters that are complex. And Sarah Pirozek, I'm so excited to meet you in quote unquote person. We've been on Film Fatale for a few years, quote unquote together. I mean, we're not really, but I'm extremely excited to continue to see what comes next. Do you want to tell us what you're working on next? Is it something you can share?
Sure. I'm working on two very different things, not horror related. One is a coming of age story of mine called The Squatter's Handbook, which I'm turning into a serialized limited series set in early 80s London.
Wow.
About when I was a political squatter living off grid as a 16-year-old. And
we'll definitely be watching that.
And then the other, which is really interesting, but I have to dig into and see if it's even possible to do, is I started making this film about interracial relationships in '93. I think I shot my first roll of film. So I have a basement full of these interviews I did with people, and then I just didn't continue with it. I don't know if I ran out of funds or I didn't have a shape for it, and then I went on to other things. And I just decided, why don't I go? I've always wanted to go back to it and see where everyone is now. Really interesting people.
The basement. You went back to the basement and hashtag like, so I don't see why you should go back to the basement filled with all the footage waiting for you. And Jeremiah, what about you? You told us you had a feature that you were just coming out with.
Yeah, the feature will be coming out probably early next year, March, April, I would think. It's a monster movie called Slap Face. And the other project that's in post right now is we just shot it this fall, and it's a post-traumatic stress disorder ghost story. But it was my first time directing an Academy Award winner. It was the great actress Melissa Leo who won the Oscar for Fighter, quite an extraordinary actress from Frozen River and so many other wonderful films. She was absolutely great to work with, a wonderful actress and a really brilliant person. And
seeing that. Really great.
So yeah, it was an honor and a privilege to work with her, and she was as wonderful as you could imagine. So that also will be coming next year.
Cool. That's wonderful. Great. And can I say one more thing?
Of course.
The hashtag like will be released in January, probably January 26th. We're not sure yet of the platform, but if people follow us on hashtag like the feature film on Facebook or like the feature film on Instagram, you'll see announcements about it.
Wonderful. And Sarah, was there something that you're working on that you're able to share with us? I know you went out to LA only recently.
Yeah. Well, I actually had a couple of things. I have a couple shorts coming out hopefully by the end of this year, early next year, that I'm really excited about. Also kind of in the horror genres. I filmed something here like within the first month of working here, which was really awesome. Like the bite-sized Hulu-ween series that they had going on. Have you heard of that?
No. It doesn't mean anything that I haven't heard of that.
Well,
he knows.
It was awesome that Hulu did this thing where they have like a series of 20 shorts made by all these various directors with various backgrounds, and they're all like supposed to be like 3 to 10 minute shorts for Halloween, and it just was a great platform for people to make something and have it on a streaming service. And they were shorts, so it was really cool. So I was very proud to be a part of that.
And what was it called, Sarah?
My episode is called This Old House, and it's directed by Robin Cloud, and she's wonderful. So everyone should go check that out. Yeah.
Thank you so much to all three of you. I think you should check out all the movies in the festival, but certainly each other's, because I think this is going to be a continued conversation in one form or another. And I will certainly be back in touch with all three of you. So thank you so much for visiting Center County. We hope to have you here in person next time. And if you want to make any additional comments or anything like that, please add it. It's going to be up there on Facebook and YouTube and Vimeo. So you can always just add, I kind of wanted to mention this, or your link, Sarah, to where, or Jeremiah, if you're opening something. So we love having you as part of our community. Have a great rest of the night. And please keep making your beautiful work.
Pearl, thank you so much for programming #like. Wish you much success. It was a pleasure meeting both of you guys.
Yeah, this is wonderful. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Yeah, thanks for the wonderful panel, you guys. I look forward to seeing your film.
Right on.